Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to get started with you and to make this fun cloud wall hanging. We are going to making these puffy watercolor clouds, and they're stuffed. So you can see they're kind of three-dimensional, and they're going to be stuffed with just scraps of paper. So I'm going to go through all of our different fun supplies we're going to be using from Creatology, and we'll get started. So firstly, we are going to be using some watercolor supplies. So we have watercolor paper and watercolor paints, as well as paint brushes and a jar of water. And then we are going to be using some scrap paper. So I've got all sorts of sort of little scraps, construction paper, even some scraps of foam sheets. So any sort of scrap paper, you could use newspaper, or even if you had like old t-shirts or paper towels or anything like that will work. You don't need a ton of it, just enough to give it a little bit of a 3D look. So you can see here that it's sort of a little fluffy look there. And then we're going to be using some scissors and some glitter glue, depending on your choice. I've got our fun confetti glue or just our standard like sparkly glitter glue. And then to attach our cute little wall hangings here, we're going to be using some rope or some yarn. I've added all these fun little like tassel fringe at the bottom, including some of this cute little sequin ribbon. So all of that's optional. You can add any sort of colors or styles that you might like. And then I'm using glue dots to attach it all. So all along the edges here, we're going to be using glue dots to attach it. You can also use a stapler if you prefer that method. Either one will work out great. And we'll go through again all of the different ways to do that and to make these fun little puffy clouds. And of course, if you guys have any questions as we get started, put all of that in the Q&A and we'll be able to answer any questions you might have, and we'll be able to get started. Okay. So our first step is going to be watercoloring our actual cloud shapes here. I do have some pre-dried watercolor sheets here as well, because your watercolors might not be dry in time to assemble the entire thing right now. You can follow along all the steps, and then you can always put it together once it fully dries, or little details like all these fun little glittery moments and stuff like that you can add at the end as well. Okay. So to start, we are going to be using our watercolor paper, or you can also use any sort of paper that you might have on hand. Whether you want to use just regular construction paper, anything like that will work. The perk about using watercolor paper is as I pull this out, you can see it's a little bit thicker of paper. And the benefit of that is that it absorbs the water and it doesn't get really thin or fragile. So sometimes if you use like just notebook paper or printer paper that's really thin, it can almost tear, or the paper will start to disintegrate when it gets too wet. But you can definitely use any sort of construction paper as well. All right, so we're going to start by doing some watercolors. And you can choose what size you want your clouds to be. For instance, on our little sample one here, of course, we have 3 different sizes, kind of a small, medium, and large. So as you can see, the large size almost takes up a whole sheet of paper, where these other 2 sizes, you can get a front and back out of one sheet of paper. So for the largest one, we're going to paint 2 sheets of paper, one for the front and one for the back. And then the other 2 styles, you can just paint 1 piece of paper.
Hey Tess, so we have a few questions before we get started.
Yeah,
If we don't have a water pad, can we use regular construction paper?
absolutely. Yes, you can totally use construction paper. and like I said, you can even use like lined paper, notebook paper, computer paper. It just might get really fragile, so I would definitely let it sit and fully dry before you try to move it around or cut it, because it might tear because it's just thin.
Awesome. And can we use tape instead if we don't have the other supplies?
Yeah, you can definitely use tape to finish out to like assemble it at the end. Um,
Okay.
we used glue dots in our little sample here, but you can definitely use tape along the edges. That will totally work. You might see it on the outside, but especially if you're just using like a clear Scotch tape or packing tape, you really won't even notice that. All right, so to get started here, we've got our paper down and we're gonna do a little watercoloring. And the best way to do this, I'm going to get my paintbrush wet first. I'm going to kind of squish it around in my water here. And then I'm going to select my first color, and you can pick any color combination that you might want. I'm going to start with a little orange. I like to kind of drop a little extra water in there so that it creates a little pool, and it will start to kind of moisten or hydrate the ink, the pigment in there, and then you'll be able to pick that up on your paintbrush. And then you can start painting. And so I'm just going to take this and do long stripes up and down to start to fill in my paper. And we're going to do a couple different styles for this one. It's going to be mostly like long linear stripes like this in different colors. We're going to do one that's all more like little uh, swirls, but you can kind of mix and match any sort of style of paint that you want to do. And you can also use any paint. If you don't have watercolor or you don't want to use watercolor today, you can definitely do the same technique and make your own little cloud wall hanging with acrylic paint or markers even. You could just draw and doodle using markers or crayons instead of paint. And watercolor is really fun, that it is really buildable. So as you start to add more color on here, you'll start to see as you add a little bit more in different places, that color actually starts to layer on top of each other and get darker. So you can see my first stripe here is really pretty light and kind of transparent. We can almost see the paper still showing through, versus as I've started to add more in here, as it starts to kind of pool, it'll darken up. And then you can mix and match colors as well. So I'm gonna do a little orange, pick up a little red, and that will just kind of darken up the tones as well. And I'm purposely leaving some gaps in my color here because I want to come back in and add in some pinks in between my oranges. And so the more layers, if you kind of let things start to dry a little bit, you can layer on more and more paint. If you layer it on too quickly while it's still drying, it can start to kind of muddy or just will leave big pools of color, which can be really pretty if you want like that sort of look where you'll get sort of these abstract little darker colors in different places. But if you really want to layer the color, letting it dry just for like a minute in between, and you can kind of start to watch it absorb. Once it starts to get a little bit more matte, so it's not so shiny, you'll see that that's when it's starting to absorb into the paper, and you can add some more layers. And now I'm doing the same thing. So I added a little bit of water to my pink. And we can start layering on some pink paint. And we're just doing sort of like an abstract paint technique. So we're going to cut these up into our cloud shapes. So we just want to kind of have some fun areas of color. And I'm not worried about it looking like a certain thing, even a cloud, because we're going to create the cloud shape once these dry. If you have any areas that are pooling a lot, or if you don't like a certain area that's pooling, you can always take your brush that maybe and dab it on top. It'll suck up some of that liquid. You kind of move that around. You can also, of course, use different brushes for different colors if you want, or just rinse your brush out in between. And play with different size brushes. And take a smaller brush here. Get a little bit of water in my yellow pigment. And that way I can just do kind of some smaller little yellow lines into my painting. And then I do want to add in some blue stripes here. You can see just to kind of start to mimic a similar color palette for our example here. We've got sort of blue going through all of these different tones and clouds that we're going to make. I think that kind of ties them all together, even though they all have different colors and different styles going on. But because the blue is such a different tone than everything else we've used so far, I'm going to set this aside for a moment while we start our next painting that's going to be very similar to this to be the back side of our largest cloud. And then once this dries a little bit more, we can add in the blue. If you add it in now while we have all these pools of color and water happening, what could happen is it just can turn into like a gray instead of having nice stripes of a perfect blue through there. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. And we can grab another sheet of paper. And again, we're going to continue with the same colors that we just did to be the back side of our first cloud. I'm just going to drop a little bit of water in a couple of these warm tones. I got my pink and my oranges and a little bit of my red. And sometimes I just like to kind of drag the edge of my watercolor brush onto the edge of the little paint circle here. And that will just kind of start to loosen up all of that paint. So when you pop your brush in there, there's plenty of water already. And again, as we are starting to use or fill up our paper, we're leaving some gaps to fill in with other colors of pink and things like that. But of course, you can use any color combos that you might want. So if you want to make your clouds all green or all purple or black and white, there is no wrong way to make this.
Hey, Tessa, we have another question. Can we use stuffing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just using scraps of paper for this project, but you could totally use stuffing if you have like cotton stuffing or batting in your craft supplies. That would be great. And I'm bringing in my pink colors again and kind of going into where there's some gaps. And adding a little bit of yellow. And there's your second side of your largest cloud. So again, we've got two sort of little abstract paintings here that are very similar. So they can be the front and back. And then we're gonna let these dry a little bit more while we move on to our next color. So that way we can add in a little bit of blue when we're ready. I'm gonna set this aside. And then you can always have little napkin, or if you have any little art rags that you use, like I do sometimes, just if you have any little overspill or you need to dry your brushes off in between. All right, we're continuing with our watercoloring and we're moving into a more of a cool tone. We're going to do some blues in here. So again, I'm going to get my water in my paint, kind of swirl that around. I'm going to do more of a swirled pattern versus a straight look. So I'm going to take my paintbrush and kind of start doing circular motions. I'm not really worried about covering the entire paper because I want you to be able to see that there are circular patterns happening. And if you just cover the entire thing, you'll lose that pattern. So I'm going to do kind of like loose circles, all overlapping a little bit. And then as it starts to dry in front of you, you can always overlap more with either lighter or darker shades as well. And as you can see, since some of this is lighter, as I take this darker shade of blue, I can overlap. That I'm not losing the color behind it, but instead it's kind of layering on top. This is where you can just have fun with the abstract side of watercolor. So again, we're not making any sort of direct patterns. Might add some yellow dots in here. To add some fun contrast. And of course, as we cut out our clouds in a moment, be able to see we're not going to use every element or every portion of your painting. You can definitely use the scraps for other crafts as well, but some of this will get kind of cut off. So I'm not really too worried about where I'm placing things, just having fun where it feels right in the moment. And there's another one of our little watercolor paintings. And again, we're going to set this aside so it can dry before we cut our clouds out. Okay, so we have one more watercolor work to do together. You might have already made multiple, or if yours is going to be smaller, you might not need as many. But for our 3 different size clouds, we're going to make one more style. And I think we'll do sort of some pinks and purples, little bits of blue as well. And I'm kind of incorporating blue throughout all of them in some way to be sort of the thing that connects all of these different colors. I'm gonna do kind of big washes of color. These are all just different ways to start a painting. I'm using my larger brush to do sort of big sweeping motions to cover a big portion of the paper. And like a good little first layer on here. I'm going to add some purple. Darken it up a little bit by taking a little bit of this dark blue. And sometimes just to mix them directly on top. If you don't mix too much in there, you'll just be able to use it all right away. It's not going to really affect the rest of the color. Like, look how quickly we sucked up all the paint out of that little pod. So even though we added in a little bit of the darker, it's not going to change that color forever. Blues here. wherever you want, maybe a little more contrast and just kind of adding in little color blocks throughout. You can just see all these different shades all kind of blurring together. And that's what's fun about watercolor, that as you do this, you can even kind of play with the water if you want. You can see all that pigment moving around, and it's going to leave really pretty edges as all that dries. Okay, so then if we wanted to go back to our original paintings here, you can see these are starting to dry nicely. We still got some pooling of color, but if you can kind of see on the side here, areas in here that are still shiny, that's all still wet paint, but then I have big portions that aren't shiny anymore. So even though my paper still feels a little bit damp, it's dry enough that I can add in some of those little blue stripes that we talked about wanting to put in. And again, I just want to add a little bit of blue in here, just so it has still some cool tones to coordinate with all the other pieces that we've made. I'm just using my thinner brush to just add in a few sort of small little stripes. Now you can see that it's still going to blend with those colors because, like I said, the paper you can feel is damp, but it's not moving around so much like these big pockets of puddles of water, because we just used a little bit of water on a thinner brush to leave more of a defined line. All right, so now we've done all of our different watercolor paintings, and you're probably going to need to wait for yours to dry a little longer. I did some ahead of time as well, so that we have some of our pieces, you can see here, ready to go, all dried, so that we can go ahead and start assembling and making the whole cloud from start to finish together. And if you need to wait to let yours finish drying, which I highly recommend, if you cut yours too soon, like I said, sometimes messing with the paper while it's still drying, you can even tear the paper. So letting it fully dry, which doesn't really take that long for watercolor, but set it aside for a little while. You can watch all the steps here, and then you can still assemble it as soon as it's dry. All right, so we're going to start by cutting out our clouds. It's going to be the next thing you do as soon as your watercolors are dry. And we're going to draw a cloud shape. I'm using like a dark colored marker here, but you could use a pencil or colored pencil. Anything is fine. And you can do two options. You can either draw a cloud directly on the front and then cut it out, or sometimes I like to draw it on the back, and it's almost a little bit of a surprise. So that way I'm not quite sure what abstract elements I'm getting in my cloud. I just know I'm going to draw these big, fluffy shapes. I'm going to take my scissors and cut along this edge. By tracing it on the back also, you don't have to worry about any of the pencil or marker showing up on the front of your artwork. There's our first little cloud, but then we flip it over. Look how cute our little abstract painting is. And then we're going to use our second sheet of painting that's the similar style. We're going to take this cloud and we're going to trace it on this one. I'm going to push this down on top. And then using my marker, I'm going to trace around the edges of the first cloud I cut out. So that way I know that when we go to line them up, they'll be the same exact sizes. And we're going to use the same technique for all of them. So we're going to draw one and then trace it to draw the other side. We have another cute little cloud. And then we'll be able to line these little guys up when we're ready to assemble them. We're gonna do the same thing with our next cloud here. And for this, you can also fold this in half. Since we know we're gonna get two clouds out of one sheet of paper, we can fold this in half. And now I know that my cloud can't be bigger than this side, or I won't be able to get two clouds out of it. So I'm gonna take my marker and draw any sort of puffy shape. Just doing these little like portions, little half circles. And then we can cut along the line we just drew. We'll have this and flip it over there. And we can trace this on our other half of our paper. And I think to be sure too, you want to make sure that you're flipping over your cloud so that the colorful side is facing you and you're drawing on the back of it. That way that those two pieces will butt up. Versus if you do it this way and then you flip it, they might not line up perfectly. So make sure you're doing it this way. So the colorful side is facing you. And then you're tracing onto the back of your painting. Cut it out, just like we did with the others. two little clouds here that we'll be able to stuff and then glue together. And then of course you have these little remnants of your paintings. You could always do little miniature pieces out of this. If you wanted to add extra little details to your clouds, you could do that. Or you could save these scraps to do cards or other little artwork, of course, as well. All right, our last cloud to cut out is going to be this one here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to fold it in half. And then I'm going to use this cloud just as a reference. I want to make sure that my next cloud is smaller than this. So when I'm looking at this, I just want to kind of get an idea to make sure that I don't make it bigger. So that way we can see all of these in a row here, that we have 3 different size clouds. And of course, we're making clouds today, but maybe you're making a different shape at home, which that would be super cool too. If you are, you can definitely put it in the Q&A and let us know. You could do the same exact technique, but instead of clouds, you could do hearts or flowers, or you could spell someone's name, anything really. So you can have fun now that you know the technique by the end of this and how to make it a little puffy shape. Then you can do it over and over again with all sorts of different styles. So again, we're going to flip this over. And then with our color side up, we're going to trace our cloud. Cut this one out as well. Two smallest clouds. And then we have ones here. And I think on our first one here, now that I'm realizing this, I think I didn't line them up quite right. So they're not going to line up because I put them back to back like this instead. Whoopsies. So what we can do though is we'll just cut a slightly smaller cloud out. Let's see here. We'll line up the portions that make the most sense. So what we'll do is just cut a smaller, we'll just draw another one smaller on here. Still is going to be bigger than the other ones. Sorry about that, guys. If you did the same thing at home, you can see a quick fix here. Just going to change the size of this a tiny bit. But if you are waiting for yours to dry, then this is really perfect. That you will definitely want to make sure that when you are tracing your clouds, that we are lining them up the right way so you don't make the same error that I did. You can see here that I want to make sure that I'm using my colorful side forward on top of the white portion or the back, so that way the whites are touching. So I got the back of my white onto the back. So I've got the 2 white portions touching, and that's going to be the way you want to trace your shapes to make sure that they line up.
Hey Tessa, we have a question. Can we use the extra cloud scraps too?
Absolutely. You can totally use the cloud scraps, whether you want to make smaller little clouds with them or if you want to add some fun details using the scraps. You could always do little mini clouds on top and kind of do a three-dimensional look if you wanted to, or cut little flowers or raindrops out of them and have them dangling from your cloud. All right, so we fixed our largest cloud here. See here now, those line up beautifully like all the rest. So we're going to start actually with our largest cloud or whichever cloud or shape you want on the bottom of your wall hanging. And so to do that, we're going to add the fun little fringe off the bottom. And then we're going to have one piece of yarn or rope or twine, whatever you might be using, is going to go all the way through all three clouds. That's what's going to hold them together. So we're going to start first with some of our glue dots. Again, you can use tape or a stapler. If you're crafting with an adult, you could use hot glue gun. There's lots of options. But to do this little fringe, we're going to cut off some rope and some yarn. And I'm just cutting off like 6 to 8 inch little pieces here. And I've got this fun little sequin ribbon from Michaels. And this is all totally optional. You can add as much or as little of this as you want to. You don't have to add any fringe if you don't want a fringe on yours. But this is also an area that you could definitely add extra little details also. So if you love the fringe, you could add little rhinestones or beads glued to the yarn, or you could take some of your scraps and draw some little raindrops and you could glue those to your fringe. There's lots of options to adorn this as much as you want to. And I just have a little combination of colors here that all kind of come from our painting. So I've got some blues and pinks, and then just a touch of this fun yellow kind of ties in the yellow dots in this little cloud. All right, so decide which side of your cloud is going to be your bottom portion of where you want your fringe to come out of. I'm going to take some glue dots. I'm going to line them up along the bottom here. And if you're unfamiliar with glue dots, it's your first time using them, they are just like a little sticky dot. Kind of just barely see that slightly yellow shiny dot there. And you can peel them off with your fingers as well. And then just stick them straight down onto your paper. And then we're going to take our yarn. I'm going to stick it onto the glue dot. And then just continue doing that. Little sequin ones, same thing. Just press them right into the glue dots. You can always trim these afterward, or they can all be different lengths. It kind of looks like little rain coming down. And when I flip this over, you can see all that cute little tassels coming out the bottom, little fringy. And then we're going to add another piece of yarn coming out the top. So we don't need to add a ton, but we want to make sure it's long enough that all three of our clouds can hold on to the same piece of yarn. It's going to run through all three to hold them all together so they hang in one line. So to do that, I'm going to cut off like a couple feet. You can always trim it at the top once we're done. And then we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to add a glue dot toward the top. And then take that piece of yarn and stick it right into that glue dot. Then you can see it's trailing out the top while I have all this little fringe coming out the bottom. And now we're going to add the back and stuff it. So to do that, I'm going to take some of my glue dots again. I'm going to go on top of my yarn along the bottom. And you don't need a glue dot on every single like little surface. God, this one doesn't want to let go of my finger. But you want it every inch or so in order to make sure you have a good amount of stickiness that's going to hold your clouds together. And I'm not sticking glue dots all the way around the whole thing yet. I'm going to start along the bottom portion here. Let me get it to stick on. Likes my finger more than my paper. Okay, so as we're ready to start to assemble this here, I'm going to take my cloud and I'm going to line up my bottom edges where I've put my glue dots. But I've left the top open. So you can see the bottom is all attached, stuck together. Give it a nice little squeeze along the bottom. No matter what type of glue you're using, if you're using glue dots or tape or hot glue, anything, always any sort of adhesive loves a little squeeze. So give it a good squeeze, make sure that all the bits are touching. You want all your edges to be nice. And now we can start to stuff this to give it that fun puffy look. You could definitely use some of your scraps if you wanted to. I'm going to kind of crumple them up and then you can shove them in. I think the construction paper that's a little bit thinner is my favorite. You can take scraps of it if you have little pieces from leftover crafts and just shove a little bit in. To see that's looking puffed up, and you can add a couple more glue dots as you go. Add a glue dot here and sort of seal the edges. Shove a little bit more paper in. Then as you go around, I'm going to add more glue dots. And line up my edges and then squeeze it closed. See if you've got any little gaps here, just take another glue dot, that inside, and then we'll be able to wash that closed. Do one more on the corner here. And there you have your first little puffy cloud of your wall hanging. And you could be done. If you only wanted to make one cloud today, you could definitely do that. You could hang this. Looks so cute all on its own. It's got fun three-dimensional detail to it by being stuffed. Or you can keep going, which is what I'm gonna do. And so I'm going to line up my next cloud. I want to have a series of 3 all hanging together. So I'm gonna line up my next one and leaving a little bit of a gap here. So you can see I've got like about 3 inches or so of space on my yarn before my next cloud. And so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add a glue dot here and then press my yarn in place. That way I know I've got it, it's safe on there. And now we can add some glue dots along the bottom edge. Are very sticky, which is a great problem to have. Now we've got some glue dots along the bottom edge here. We're going to take our cloud that matches the same size, and we're going to line it up on the bottom. But again, we're leaving the top. There's no glue dots at the top yet because we want to be able to stuff it now. And we're going to take some of our construction paper here and crumple it up. And then push it inside the 2 clouds. You can see how much of it you can fit in there if you want to do a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on how puffy you want your cloud to be. You, of course, want to make sure that you aren't making it so puffy that you can't seal it up. And a little bit goes a long way because it is paper that we're stuffing. It really like starts to pop open quickly. You can see, but just a couple, you can see all like that dimension that you're getting from it. And start closing up your borders. And as you do that, you can kind of push down the stuffing as you go. And then you can decide where you might, if you have room to add a little bit more. Take another little bit of scraps here. Crumble that up, and then I can shove that inside. And go ahead and close up this cloud. It's our second little cloud there. Look at our cute little wall hanging coming together. And we can move on to our last step to build this. Then you can add all sorts of fun decorations as much as you want. But again, I'm going to kind of line these up. So I want about the same amount of gap in between my next clouds. Add a little glue dot here. And then hold my yarn in place. And then just do the same steps as we did. So we're going to add Some more glue dots along the bottom border. And then we'll take our topper cloud and sandwich that yarn in between and squeeze all those glue dots along the bottom. And then again, we're going to crumple up our paper and stuff it between the two clouds we have. Sometimes crumpling it up into smaller pieces is easier to get more in there as you start to kind of seal up all of your edges. More glue dots on the edges here. We're adding the last couple glue dots to finish off our last little cloud. And there you have all three clouds all attached into a cute little wall hanging. To finish it off at the top here, what I like to do is just do a simple little knot. So depending on how long you want this top portion to be, where you want it to hang. But I'm just going to kind of fold this piece in half to make a little loop. Grab that and then make a little circle around your fingers. Take that little loop through the circle and pull it tight to make a little knot. You can cut off the extra bit. Now you have a nice little way to hang it on, whether it's a little knob or a nail, on your front door, wherever you might want to add your cute little wall hanging. And then lastly, you can add all different fun details. Now that this is all put together, you can easily glue more elements on, or you can do some fun things like I am with some of these glitter glue that is so cute. And of course, Creatology has 1,000 different styles of glitter glue, so you can use any style that you might want. But with this little confetti glue here, you can take it and kind of just squeeze a little out first. Make sure we're ready for it. You can do little dots of confetti glitter. And this is a glue, so it's just going to stick and dry with fun little glitter dots without all the mess of traditional glitter. Of course, you could do both sides if you want. If you do, just let one side dry first, and then you can flip it over and do the other side. We can use our more traditional glitter pins that I'm always a fan of. And you can even do some fun little details like little swirls. And these, when you first draw them on like this, they're definitely going to be like raised up. But as they dry, they're going to dry flat as the glue dries. And you're just going to be left with these fun little details of glitter all over your beautiful clouds. And let's see here, maybe a little bit of blue on here. And you can do little zigzags, little lightning bolts. Add some extra little purple glitter dots because why not? And there you have your finished cloud wall hanging. It's ready to go. You can just let it dry and then you can hang it on the wall, and it is full of color and glitter and sequins, and it's puffy. So it has some fun three-dimensional elements to it as well. So thanks so much for crafting with me and Michael's, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks.